Okay, so we're doing another episode from my sausage series. We're going to make merguez today. Merguez is a lamb sausage that's popular in North Africa. It's commonly sold there by street vendors. And so what I'm starting with here is I've got about 2.2 pounds or a kilogram of lamb. Kilogram of lamb. And it's kind of a mix. It's about 800 grams of lamb cubes and 200 grams of fat, lamb fat. That's a good combination. Sort of depends on how fatty the cubes themselves are. These were pretty decent. And I'm grinding them up. So the grinder is, and the plates have been put in the freezer, so they're nice and cold. And I also had the lamb in the freezer for a little bit. I didn't want to, not frozen solid, but just basically kind of cold and getting a little bit frosty. And what that's going to do is going to keep the grinder plates from overheating from the friction, which can start to cook some of the meat and melt some of the fat. You don't want that to happen. So, I got all this nice cold metal here, and I put in the cold lamb. Now, one of the tricks is to get all of the meat out is to throw some stale bread in at the end. And that'll help push the meat out. And you can tell when the bread is starting to come through. And once you get to that point where the bread is starting to come through, you basically just shut this thing off. So I'm just about to that point, almost. Now, I use the small grinder plate here, which is the 4.5 millimeter plate in the set that I have. So now I'm starting to see that. Yeah, I'm starting to see that bread. Here's little bits of the bread. So I'm going to stop. All right, so now I got all the nice ground lamb. So into that, I'm going to put 3 teaspoons of salt. I've got 2 teaspoons of black pepper, a couple of large garlic cloves that I minced really, really fine and then smashed to death. 2 teaspoons of cayenne pepper. All right. This is a half of a teaspoon of ground allspice. I've got 2 teaspoons of paprika, a half of a teaspoon of cumin, and 1 tablespoon of olive oil. That's all it takes. And then I mix it all up. I don't want to overwork this, right, because I don't want it to get tough. But I mix it all up, and I'll get it all well blended. Now, I'm not going to stuff this into the casings today because, I have here, I'm not going to have the flavors all nice and all the way through and melded in with the whole sausage and the meat and everything like that. I'm going to have little pockets of things. So what I want to do is I'm going to mix this up pretty well, like I just did now. And then this is going to go into the fridge until tomorrow. And then that'll give an opportunity for all these flavors to work their way through the meat, and I'll be able to eliminate those little pockets of flavor. So into the fridge this goes, and then we'll come back tomorrow and we'll stuff them. All right, so the merguez sat overnight. We got all those nice flavors melded in together. I mixed it up a little bit. First, I let it come, to about room temperature so I could work it a little bit better. It wouldn't be so stiff. I mixed it up a little, make sure everything was mixed well. I've put it in my sausage stuffer, and now I'm ready to go through this stuffing process. We'll crank down on this thing. What I've got on here, this is a thin sausage. It kind of looks rather like you've seen for breakfast links. It's that kind of a size. So I've got some small thin casings. And what I'm using is actually sheep casings instead of pork. Pork usually use hog casings. I got sheep because, this is a lamb sausage and I have friends who don't eat pork. And so I made sure that I'm using not just no pork products in the meat itself, but also I'm not wrapping it in any pork products. So now I've got down in there and I'm cranking, and there is the sausage coming out. So the first thing I do is I tie off the end. Now that I've got no air in it, I can tie off the end here. Okay, like that. All right. And then once I've got that end tied off, then I'm going to start feeding the sausage through and double tie. Make sure it stays like that. Double tie it. And then I'm going to start feeding the sausage through, and I'm going to sort of help it along. All right, so because I definitely want to do that. I don't want it to just, it could overfill if I don't kind of guide it. It might stop, and then it'll overfill. Oh, looks like I slipped out of my clamps here. Okay, you can see I'm cranking it, and we're just going to let that keep going until I get to the end of this particular piece of the casing. I put a series of them on here. Oop, and actually, there we go. That happened. This happens occasionally. It broke, no problem. I'm just going to call that the end of this batch. Push that through. Casings break occasionally, just go with it. So I'm going to take this out. I'll feed that, take that sausage that's just sitting there. I will feed that back in to that, and I'll do it. So I've tied the end off on both ends. I got this nice little thing. Usually, merguez is not made into links. It's actually coiled. So it's usually sold like this in a coil. And the only other thing I have to do with it is prick it with this little sausage pricker. And the reason for that is, so when it cooks and expands and some of the fat gets big, you know, what I'll do is this, by pricking it all the way around, it'll let that excess out and it won't break the casing. So I just do that. I'll do that on the other side. Now you're gonna, if you don't have a pricker like this, I bought this. This is actually is a sausage pricker that I bought online. But if you don't have one of those, use a pin or something. Don't use a fork. The tines on the fork are too big, and the holes will be too big. All of this stuff you can get on the internet. The casings you can get on the internet. They do have to be soaked. They're packed in natural casings. They're packed in salt. Soak them in warm water for about a half an hour, and then they're ready to go. So that's it, folks. That's merguez. I'm going to get back to work here and finish these, and I'll see you in another episode.